When someone pulls away from you, it hurts. It shakes your identity, your confidence, your sense of worth. And what do most people do? They chase, they beg. They try to fix something that was never their responsibility. But here's the truth most people never hear. Avoidants don't come back because you hold on. They come back when you let go, when you flip the script, when you stop chasing the person who runs from connection and start chasing the best version of yourself. Avoidants withdraw because they feel overwhelmed, pressured, or afraid of intimacy, and the moment you lean in harder, you confirm their fear. But when you reclaim your power, when you stand tall, when you stop waiting for someone who isn't showing up, that's when everything changes, because the real shift happens inside you. You stop asking, why did they pull away? And you start asking, what can I build, create, and become that makes me unstoppable? When you flip the script, you send a message that is louder than any text, any call, any apology. My life moves forward with or without you. And do you know what happens then? The avoidant feels something they've never felt before. Respect, space, curiosity, the pull of your energy instead of the pressure of your need. You can't convince someone to choose you, but you can become the version of yourself that no one walks away from twice. So today, I want you to shift your identity, not to someone who waits, but someone who creates, not someone who begs, but someone who builds, not someone who clings, but someone who commands their value. Avoidants don't come back when you chase them. They come back when you become the strongest, most aligned, most self-driven version of yourself. Flip the script, reclaim your power. Become the person whose presence is impossible to ignore and whose absence is unforgettable. Your life is too big, too bold, too powerful to shrink for anyone. Rise, rebuild, and watch how everything, including the people who walked away, starts to move differently. Because when you change the story, you change the ending. When someone with an avoidant attachment style distances themselves, the instinctive reaction is to chase, to reach out, to close the emotional gap as fast as possible. But chasing an avoidant person only reinforces the very reason they pulled back in the first place. Avoidants are highly sensitive to anything that feels like pressure, emotional intensity, or expectations they fear they cannot meet. When you pursue them, even with good intentions, it amplifies their internal alarm system. They retreat not because you're unworthy, but because closeness feels unsafe to them. The more you lean in, the faster they move away. That dynamic turns into a loop where your efforts to reconnect create the opposite effect of what you want. Understanding this is the foundation of regaining your power. The moment you stop chasing, everything shifts. It's not about playing games or acting cold. It's about stepping back into your center. By removing emotional pressure, you interrupt the avoidance internal fear cycle. They no longer feel the need to run because there is nothing chasing them. This creates psychological space, something avoidants crave more than anything. In that space, they can breathe, they can recalibrate, they can actually begin to notice your absence instead of your pursuit. You are no longer a force pushing toward them. You become a calm, grounded presence they can approach on their own terms. Chasing comes from fear. Fear of losing them, fear of being alone, fear of being rejected. But stepping back comes from strength. When you stop trying to convince someone to stay, you send a powerful message. I want connection, but I don't need to abandon myself for it. That shift in energy is magnetic. Avoidants are not drawn to pressure. They're drawn to stability. They don't trust intense closeness, but they do trust consistency, emotional self-control, and secure energy. When you stop chasing, you step into that secure identity. They begin to see you differently, not as someone who needs them to feel whole, but as someone who is already whole. Pulling back also creates an emotional reset. When you were chasing, the dynamic was imbalanced. They held the power and you were seeking validation. When you step out of that role, the dynamic equalizes. You reclaim your voice, your boundaries, your sense of worth. That alone changes how they perceive you and how they respond to you instead of feeling overwhelmed by your presence. They become curious about your distance. Avoidants usually aren't aware of the emotional impact they have until they feel the shift in energy. Your silence, your calmness, your lack of desperation. That is when their fear of intimacy softens and their fear of losing you wakes up. Avoidants come back when they feel safe, when they feel respected, and when they feel the freedom to approach without pressure. Chasing removes that safety. Stepping back restores it. Your absence communicates more than your messages ever could. It shows strength, self-respect, and emotional independence. And those qualities pull avoidance in far more powerfully than any words, reassurance, or attempts to close the gap. By not chasing, you break the pattern that pushed them away and create the conditions that allow them to return on their own. When someone pulls away from you, the first reaction is usually to look outward. What did they do? Why did they leave? What changed in their behavior? But the true shift happens when you stop focusing on them and begin focusing on yourself. Transformation doesn't start with understanding their actions. It starts with understanding your own power. When you redirect your energy inward, you begin to uncover the patterns, beliefs, and emotional habits that have shaped your reactions. Instead of spiraling in self-doubt or panic, you step into a new identity, one that isn't controlled by someone else's distance. This is where your strength begins to rebuild. You start seeing yourself as someone capable, resilient, and worthy, regardless of who stays or walks away. The moment you look inward, you begin reclaiming control over your emotional state. You stop waiting for their text to decide how your day will feel. You stop letting their silence dictate your worth. You begin to meet your own emotional needs instead of outsourcing them to someone who can't meet them right now. This internal shift is powerful because it breaks the dependency that often fuels anxiety around avoidant behavior. When you turn your focus toward your own growth, your goals, your healing, your identity, you reduce the emotional pressure in the connection. That pressure is often what triggers the avoidant in the first place. By relieving it, you not only heal yourself, but you also create the conditions that make reconnection possible. Focusing on yourself also reveals the strengths you forgot you had. Pain makes people shrink their world, but growth expands it again. You begin engaging in activities that make you feel alive, pursuing goals you put on hold, reconnecting with your passions, and rebuilding the parts of yourself that were overshadowed by the relationship. This renewed sense of purpose shifts your entire energy. Instead of radiating fear or insecurity, you radiate confidence and self-assurance. That change doesn't go unnoticed. When you elevate yourself, you naturally elevate the way people respond to you. You become someone who leads with groundedness instead of neediness, within tension instead of fear. An avoidant person doesn't respond to words. They respond to energy. They feel when you're anxious, when you're chasing, when you're trying too hard. But they also feel when you've refocused on your own life and stopped relying on them for emotional stability. That shift is magnetic because it removes their fear of being overwhelmed. They begin to see you as someone strong, secure, and emotionally independent. This creates a sense of safety they rarely experience. Ironically, the more you invest in yourself, the easier it becomes for them to approach you again. They no longer feel pressure. They feel space, respect, and balance. Internal transformation isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about rising into a version of yourself that reflects your true value. When you stop making them the center of your emotional world, you unlock a sense of power that is impossible to ignore. You begin to act, think, and live from a place of self-trust. And that transformation doesn't just change how you navigate relationships. It changes how you navigate your entire life. When you reclaim your independence after an avoidant pulls away, something shifts at the deepest level of your identity. You stop operating from a place of fear and start moving from a place of self-worth. Independence doesn't mean shutting down emotionally or pretending you don't care. It means remembering who you were before anxiety took over. It means grounding yourself in your own value instead of waiting for someone else to validate it. When you begin focusing on your own goals, routines, and passions, you rebuild the foundation that makes you emotionally strong. Avoidants are sensitive to any hint of emotional dependency, but they're drawn instinctively to people who radiate stability. The moment you return to your center, your energy becomes lighter, stronger, and more attractive. Not because you're trying to attract them, but because you're becoming aligned with yourself. This shift in independence creates a new dynamic. The avoidant is no longer positioned as the source of your emotional safety. You are. When you stop relying on their responses to feel calm or secure, you step into a version of yourself that is more confident and less reactive. This confidence is not loud or aggressive. It's quiet, grounded, and unmistakable. When you wake up in the morning and your mood isn't controlled by whether they reached out, you regain emotional sovereignty. That sense of internal control becomes magnetic. It signals to others that you are capable of standing on your own 2 feet and that you can handle life's challenges without collapsing into fear or desperation. Avoidance feels safest with people who are emotionally balanced. When you reclaim your independence, you remove the pressure that once triggered their distancing. Instead of feeling like they're responsible for your happiness, they see someone who can take care of themselves. This creates space for curiosity and connection to grow. Your independence allows them to feel free, which ironically makes it easier for them to come toward you. This isn't manipulation, it's alignment. You're no longer gripping onto them, you're holding onto yourself. And people are drawn to those who hold themselves with strength and grace. Independence also changes how you communicate and respond. Instead of reacting from panic, you respond from clarity. Instead of sending long emotional messages, you express yourself simply and truthfully. Instead of trying to prove your worth, you embody it. This shift is powerful because it removes the emotional noise from the connection. Avoidants listen more closely when they don't feel overwhelmed. They notice the changes in your tone, your boundaries, and your energy. They sense when you're no longer trying to pull them back in, and that absence of pressure makes them feel safe again. As you invest in yourself emotionally, mentally, physically, you begin to build a life that feels full and meaningful. You reconnect with friends, pursue personal goals, work on your fitness or career, and re-engage with the parts of your life that may have dimmed during the emotional roller coaster. This fullness doesn't push the avoidant away, it draws them in. People are attracted to those who have a rich inner world and a life they genuinely enjoy. When your world becomes bigger than the relationship, the avoidant sees someone who is not only valuable but also secure. Independence sends one undeniable signal: you are choosing yourself. And when you choose yourself fully, you become someone who commands respect, not someone who pleads for attention. That kind of energy is impossible to ignore and even harder to walk away from twice. You cannot take responsibility for someone else's emotional wounds, fears, or patterns, no matter how deeply you care for them. When an avoidant pulls away, many people immediately fall into the trap of believing they must fix the situation. They think if they say the right words, offer enough reassurance, or show enough devotion, the avoidant will suddenly feel safe and come closer. But avoidant attachment isn't something you can soothe with effort. Their fear of intimacy was shaped long before you entered their life. It comes from childhood experiences, emotional modeling, and internal beliefs they developed over years. You didn't cause it, and you cannot cure it. Trying to fix an avoidance fear only reinforces the dynamic that makes them withdraw, because your attempts often feel like pressure, even when they're coming from love. This is where the real emotional shift happens. When you understand that you cannot change, NGE, their wiring, you stop placing yourself in the role of rescuer. That role drains you, frustrates them, and destabilizes the connection. The more you try to fix their emotional distance, the more they feel like they're failing you. Avoidants often carry an internal belief that they are not enough for closeness, so when you push for more, they feel exposed, inadequate, and overwhelmed. Pulling back is their way of protecting themselves from those feelings. When you try harder in those moments, you unintentionally confirm their fear that closeness leads to pressure and emotional demand. By accepting that their healing is their responsibility, you release yourself from the emotional burden of trying to change them. This doesn't mean you stop caring about them. It means you stop carrying them. You stop trying to be their therapist, their emotional stabilizer, or their savior. You step out of the cycle where your happiness depends on their ability to overcome something they haven't chosen to work on yet. This shift frees up your emotional energy so you can invest it where it actually creates growth in your own self-worth, your boundaries, and your personal power. You begin to see that you cannot pour enough love into someone to make them feel secure if they have never learned to feel secure within themselves. Avoidants often return or soften when they feel understood but not pressured. When you stop trying to fix their distance, you stop activating their defenses. They begin to feel that they can be themselves without disappointing you. This creates emotional safety, not through control, but through acceptance. Ironically, the moment you stop trying to fix them is when you create the environment where they may actually choose to grow. But that growth must come from within them, not from your effort. Your power lies in understanding the difference between influence and responsibility. You can influence someone by being secure, grounded, and consistent, but you cannot take responsibility for healing wounds that aren't yours. When you step into that truth, you break the emotional dependency that keeps you stuck. You reclaim your emotional boundaries and protect your heart from being drained by a battle you were never meant to fight. And most importantly, you allow relationships to become places of mutual choice, not emotional obligation. When you shift your focus from trying to pull someone back to building your own strength, the entire dynamic changes, often in ways you never expected. Avoidants don't respond to pressure, persuasion, or emotional intensity. They respond to energy, and the moment your energy shifts, their perception of you shifts as well. When you flip the script, you stop operating from fear and start operating from certainty. You stop chasing and start expanding. You stop trying to control the outcome and begin controlling your own direction. This internal transformation creates a ripple effect that changes how the avoidant experiences you and the connection itself. Flipping the script means interrupting the habitual pattern that has kept both of you stuck. When they pull away and you pursue, it creates a predictable loop, one that reinforces their fears and erodes your self-esteem. But when you no longer follow that script, the dynamic becomes unfamiliar. Instead of chasing, you hold your ground. Instead of reacting, you choose your response. Instead of waiting, you move forward. This unexpected shift disrupts the avoidance internal narrative about you. They no longer see someone who overextends, overexplains, or overinvests. They begin seeing someone who values themselves enough to step back and preserve their emotional peace. This shift doesn't just change their perception, it changes your identity. When you flip the script, you reclaim your emotional space. You stop placing the avoidant on a pedestal and start viewing them as a human being with flaws, fears, and limitations. You recognize your own worth independent of their attention. That clarity makes you stronger, calmer, and more grounded. Instead of trying to prove your value, you embody it. Instead of questioning what you did wrong, you remember everything you do right. The avoidant feels this change on a subconscious level. Your energy becomes less demanding and more self-contained. That is the kind of energy that feels safe to them. Changing the dynamic also creates room for genuine connection. When the avoidant no longer feels responsible for your emotional balance, they can begin to approach without fear. Pressure turns into curiosity. Distance turns into awareness. Silence turns into reflection. Avoidants are far more perceptive than they appear on the surface. When the pattern they're used to no longer exists, they begin to notice the absence of your old reactions. They notice your emotional stillness. They notice your lack of pursuit. And that absence often speaks louder than any words you could say. Flipping the script is ultimately about taking back your emotional independence. You're not doing it to manipulate the avoidant, you're doing it to restore your power. When you shift from seeking validation to expressing authenticity, you become someone who is emotionally whole. This change transforms the dynamic because you are no longer trapped in the role of the pursuer. You step into the role of someone who chooses themselves first. That choice reverberates through the entire relationship, altering the avoidant's comfort, your confidence, and the emotional balance between you. The truth is, avoidants aren't drawn to people who bend themselves to fit the relationship. They're drawn to people who trust themselves, who set boundaries, who move forward with purpose. When you flip the script, you stop reinforcing their fears and start embodying the security they're subconsciously drawn to. The dynamic changes not because you force it, but because you become someone who naturally shifts the gravitational pull of the relationship. And once that happens, everything begins to move differently. When you invest in becoming the strongest version of yourself, you create a shift that changes everything, not just in the relationship, but in your entire life. Strength isn't about pretending you don't care or acting invincible. It's about building a foundation that is so solid, no distance or silence can shake it. When you begin focusing on your growth, your purpose, your emotional stability, and your personal evolution, you transform your energy in a way that becomes impossible for others to ignore. Avoidants, who are naturally drawn to emotional safety and personal autonomy, feel this shift instantly. They may not understand it logically, but they feel it energetically. Your groundedness becomes magnetic because it signals security rather than need. Becoming the strongest version of yourself means cultivating an inner world that is rich, meaningful, and self-sustaining. You're no longer looking to the avoidant to fill emotional gaps in your life. Instead, you're filling them yourself with passion, purpose, discipline, self-love, and commitment to your own growth. You start showing up differently in conversations. You speak with calmness instead of urgency. You express your needs without fear. You take action toward your goals without waiting for external validation. These changes reflect a version of you that is anchored from within. People, especially avoidants, trust stability. They trust people who don't crumble under pressure. When you embody strength, you become someone who natural. Why draws respect and curiosity? As you evolve, you also become more emotionally predictable, not in a boring way, but in a secure way. Avoidants fear emotional chaos. They fear relationships that demand too much too quickly. But when you step into your highest self, you become someone whose emotional responses are consistent, calm, and rooted in self-awareness. That consistency removes the unpredictability that often triggers avoidant withdrawal. Your presence becomes a safe space, not because you're tiptoeing around their issues, but because you've cultivated emotional mastery. You understand your feelings, communicate clearly, and no longer react from fear. This level of strength creates a gravitational pull that is far more powerful than chasing ever could be. The stronger you become, the more your life expands. You begin attracting opportunities, social, professional, emotional, that reinforce your newfound identity. You form healthier relationships, set stronger boundaries, and surround yourself with environments that elevate your growth. This expansion makes you more vibrant, more confident, and more aligned with your true self. Avoidants, who often struggle with their own inner world, find themselves drawn to people whose lives feel grounded and fulfilling. Your strength becomes an invitation, not through pressure, but through presence. You're not trying to pull them in. They're simply drawn toward the stability and authenticity you exude. This version of you is powerful not because it forces connection, but because it magnetizes it. People naturally gravitate toward those who are whole, self-assured, and purpose-driven. Avoidants especially feel safe around individuals who don't rely on them for emotional survival. When they sense your independence, your confidence, and your self-respect, the fear that once pushed them away begins to dissolve. They approach not because you chased, but because your strength created a space where they don't feel threatened or overwhelmed. Becoming the strongest version of yourself doesn't just attract people back. It transforms the way they see you. It elevates the dynamic, shifts the emotional balance, and creates a connection rooted in mutual respect rather than emotional imbalance. When you rise into your full potential, you change the way the world responds to you. And once you step into that power, no one, not even an avoidant, can look at you the same way again. At the end of the day, everything you're facing right now is shaping you into someone stronger, wiser, and more powerful than you've ever been. Avoidants don't return because you chase them. They return because you rise. They return because you step into your identity, not their shadow. They return because you shift from seeking validation to owning your worth. You were never meant to shrink yourself to keep someone close. You were meant to grow, expand, and evolve into a person whose presence is undeniable. When you change the narrative, you change the outcome. When you flip the script, you flip your destiny. And remember this, the real victory is not getting someone back. The real victory is becoming the version of yourself you always knew you could be, the version who leads with clarity, confidence, and emotional power, the version who does not break when someone pulls away but becomes unstoppable. This journey is not about them. It's about you, and once you rise, the world rises with you. Thank you for listening, for showing up for yourself, and for choosing growth over fear. Thank you for having the courage to look inward, to face your patterns, and to take back your emotional power. Thank you for giving yourself permission to become stronger, wiser, and more grounded than ever before. Remember, you are more powerful than your pain. You are bigger than your heartbreak. You are stronger than the silence between you and anyone who walked away. Keep rising, keep growing, keep choosing yourself. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. And until we meet again, stay strong, stay focused, and stay unstoppable.